I wanted to start off with kind of a timeline that I created of how we ended up where we are today in terms of the conflict. And prior to 1917, the Middle East was primarily tribal land when Great Britain learned of the oil rich land to the south. The conflict sort of began in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, in which Britain declared its support for the development of a sovereign Jewish nation in the Middle East. The Big Four, which was US, Great Britain, France, and Italy, created the Mandate system, which divided up the Middle East into European colonies. And as the Jewish population rose, the Palestinians found themselves out of resources and jobs. This led to a revolt orchestrated by the Black Hand, a Palestinian militant group. And by the end of World War II, Jewish immigration increased due to persecution in Germany. Great Britain had been limiting immigration at this time as to not overwhelm the territory, and President Truman was pressured by Israel to request the number of immigration certificates be increased. Great Britain said no, and many Jews immigrated illegally. Around 1947, Palestine was handed over to the UN, which adopted Resolution 181, which was a new plan of splitting Palestine between Jews and Arabs. Arabs did not agree with this proposition of splitting, and Great Britain went ahead and imposed this idea anyway and withdrew all of its troops, which gave Israel the opportunity to kind of take over more of the land and declare the Islamic State to the UN. This was supported by the US. Israel started taking control of the majority of the land, and that's when 5 Arab nations got involved, which we now know as the Arab-Israeli War of 1948. After this, Resolution 242 called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces occupied during the war, that were occupying territory during the war. However, this resolution was never fully implemented, which led to the surprise attack of Yom Kippur by Egypt and Syria on Israel in order to regain the territory that they had lost. This led to President Jimmy Carter orchestrating the Camp David Accords to reach a peace agreement between Israel and Egypt, allowing for Palestinians to return to Gaza and the West Bank. But after years of conflict, Palestinians were still very upset and angry and rose up against the Israeli government. This then led to the Oslo Accords, negotiated by Bill Clinton, which established Palestinians' ability to govern themselves and mandated the withdrawal of all Israel troops from 6 cities and 150 towns. Around 2000 to 2005, we see the rise of Hamas, which leads us to where we are today. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has become a symbol due to the expulsion of Arab Palestinians by European and Israeli forces. Other Islamic groups and other terrorist organizations view this encroachment as European superiority, targeting Middle Eastern assets. For Arab nationals outside of the Middle East, this conflict symbolizes kind of the white superiority complex that has led to the colonialization of other nations. And this ethnic cleansing of Palestinians only reinforces and substantiates the feelings of discrimination and marginalization. This can lead to the use of propaganda and now media to radicalize and inspire other terrorist groups to take action in the form of violence. It often fuels groups and encourages violent action. This can offer one possible explanation for the attack of 9/11 that took place in New York. This attack on American soil was in response to the United States' continuous support for Israel in terms of providing funds and weapons, which we are still currently providing in the form of $8.3 billion per year. There's obvious ethical and moral dilemmas that arise from counterterrorism operations that impact areas with civilians. These massacres of civilians is an unwarranted approach to countering terrorism. An example of this violence is seen by the US after 9/11. Around 950,000 people have been killed in the Middle East, including around 432,000 civilians, and this number does not include civilians who died indirectly as a result of these attacks. Counterterrorism attacks can easily be viewed as terrorism from the Islamic point of view, and retaliation from them would then be perceived as a counterterrorism act itself. If these attacks are targeting terrorist groups that pose a risk to safety of another country, then killing civilians doesn't ensure the safety of another nation. It only enrages and facilitates more violence. I don't think any circumstances would validate the use of counterterrorism attacks that endanger and kill civilians in another area, as those civilians are not necessarily seen as a threat to the security of another nation. Summarizing the historical significance of the Israel-Palestine conflict cannot be something that's done in 7 to 8 minutes alone. Considering that the world's greatest minds have not been able to remedy this conflict for over a century, I'm not sure what new insight I could provide that would provide any reconciliation. Over the years, different peace accords have resulted in short-term periods of peace, none of which have lasted longer than 10 years. Generally speaking, the systematic removal of a people from a land has never resulted in peace. The only solution I have to offer is the cessation of validating violence through a commitment to faith on behalf of God. Without perceived superiority, claims to land would not be entitled. However, this social approach relies on individuals sharing ideology and goals, which is almost non-existent. We've tried other economic approaches, like embargoes and tariffs that primarily just limit resources for civilians in need. And the diplomatic ties that we have to ensure allies leads to supplying the weapons that kill those civilians. If the great minds we have today cannot find a way to resolve this conflict, I'm not sure what help I could offer. The only solution that I could see being beneficial is considering the facts of the conflict without any bias towards any religious affiliations of the groups. In addition to my timeline, I also wanted to add a map of how, over the century, this conflict has grown in terms of land rather than in terms of faith. And then I wanted to show my references. Thank you.